Right, I think we can get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning into ARENA's webinar on our recently published 2025 Lifecycle Assessment Guidelines for Bioenergy Projects. My name is Samira Tadikonda, and I'll be your MC for the next hour. Note that this webinar is being recorded and will be published on our website along with the presentation material. Before we go through the agenda, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I pay my respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Moving to the next slide, a quick glance over today's agenda. We'll start with a quick introduction and context setting, after which the author and reviewer of the guidelines will present on the guidelines, following which we'll move into a Q&A session. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function for questions, and we'll continue to monitor that. Without further ado, I will pass on to Alex Grant, ARENA's General Manager for Transport, to do the introductions. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Samira, and great to have everyone here today. I guess one of the reasons we're here is that a life cycle analysis is the globally accepted best practice to show the emissions reduction that come from projects that provide bioenergy and really look to decarbonise some of those harder to electrify sectors of our economy. And that includes converting agricultural residue into biogas, or low carbon liquid fuels, or other measures. By completing an LCA, projects are able to confidently provide the value and demonstrate the value they provide in both the positive and negative emissions changes across our product's life cycle, and can ensure that the decisions made are based on credible data. They build stakeholder trust and otherwise can help elevate our understanding of why this is a key part of our decarb toolkit. So ARENA's 2025 LCA guidelines are a refresh of our 2016 version, and they reflect that there's been a lot happening in the last couple of years. They provide updating reporting requirements and provide that guidance to our applicants and the broader sector, as well as aligning to international best practice. So ARENA requires a life cycle assessment to be done for all projects that involve bioenergy, both at the earlier stages and then to demonstrate that this has been achieved. And these guidelines represent ARENA's view and preferred approach for applicants seeking funding, noting that there are several certification regimes that operate around the globe. So today's update is one piece of how ARENA is supporting the uptake of bioenergy in Australia and in our ways to accelerate decarbonisation across transport, heavy industry and other sectors. So after that, let's get on to the experts.
Thanks, Alex. I wanted to present you our author and reviewer, so Tim Grant from Life Cycles and Jonas Bengston from Edge Impact. They will walk us through the key changes and answer any questions that you have on the guidelines. Over to you, Tim and Jonas.
Great, go ahead, Jonas.
Thank you. I think we can go to the next slide, please. So as Alex mentioned, we've part of the updates that we've done is in recognition of the international standards and schemes that have developed over the years. So back in 2016, when we developed the first set of guidelines, there were a couple of standards and methodologies available, but it's developed a lot over the last 9 years now. So that's been a key part of the updates to really harmonize with those frameworks, specifically when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel and developments in that sector. Also, in terms of the dual approach, so that's now two ways to do the LCA, and Tim will talk to this in some depth in the next section in terms of what that dual approach, how it works and when to use which. Also, to streamline the proof of concept stage LCA, so the early stage assessment. So in terms of environmental impact categories, we've focused them on the most critical indicators. And also there's been development in terms of carbon accounting. So there's been updates with regards to biogenic carbon, land use change calculations. And there's also been IPCC methodology developments over the years. So it's bringing the ARENA guidelines and method up to speed to those developments. And in the original set of guidelines, there was quite a lot of support in terms of guidance and practical tools. We've expanded that in the appendices with more examples, enhanced feedstock classifications, and guidance towards software and support from practitioners that can help with the assessment. So those are the key updates, and I'll hand over to Tim to walk through some of the critical, kind of more complex areas of the new set of guidelines. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Jonas. So with the alignment, the international alignment refers specifically to these certification schemes that have emerged over the last 9 years and will continue to emerge and be refined in the next few years, a few happening in Australia and internationally. If we just move to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. So with the certification schemes, they are unique in some ways and a little different to bioenergy schemes in and of themselves. So certification schemes typically are focusing on a specific commodity, aviation fuel, diesel, maybe biogas. They are relatively strict. They're looking for a common basis for comparison, so you can come up with a carbon intensity of a fuel, which you can then compare across all different proponents producing that fuel. They are focused on trying to be a standardized, simplified framework. So often they will make some determinations and compromises to sort of make everything sort of fit the one process. So it's a bit of a one-size-fits-all scheme to apply to get a benchmark of different participating fuels, because they're trying to certify, what's good and bad within that framework. They also will have, outside of the greenhouse gas calculation, many other requirements and things which typically are central to the guidance within the ARENA framework. So we just hold that in mind. That's what we have adjusted the guidance to help be aligned with these schemes. If we go to the next slide, the guidelines, so basically our alignment is that the general methodology and approaches are very similar, following the same allocations, boundaries, functional units that are being used in the CORSIA Renewable Energy Directive from Europe, called RED III, and then there are sort of other schemes like ISCC+, which are essentially aligning with those schemes, which we have followed in a general sense, not specifically to the letter, and the emerging GO scheme. We have allowed for there's two different points in which you undertake an LCA within the ARENA guidance, and the first one is a really proof of concept stage, and we actually allow, if you've undertaken, if the proponent's undertaken a CORSIA or a RED or a ISCC+ certification, that will excuse me, suffice for your actual first stage of your LCA. For the second stage of the LCA, there are broader guidance, broader requirements on different indicators that need to be included, and so there's additional work to be done, but still the general methodology is aligning with those certification schemes. If we go to the next slide, however, there is something that's sort of left out. I sort of mentioned there that these certification schemes can apply some simplifications. They can be very narrowly focused on the commodity, fuel commodity, and sometimes that doesn't capture the full benefits of a bioenergy system. So if we go to we've developed an alternative approach that can be done in parallel. If we go to the next slide. And this alternative approach is really focused on how we address the bioenergy project more broadly. In comparison to the certification schemes, which are really focused on the end fuel, bioenergy projects typically are focusing on a feedstock. They're starting with some material. They will often process that material. There will be a diversity of outputs and business cases built into that bioenergy system. Sometimes that is managing problematic wastes, utilization of residues. Sometimes it's using a high quality feedstock but getting a significant group of feed products, energy products out of the end. And so we really thought we needed an approach that could evaluate the overall benefits of a bioenergy project as an alternative to, or as an addition to the real commodity approach where we're just looking at the carbon intensity of the fuel number. Each project is, so each project is different depending on the feedstock and technology. So the guidance for the certification schemes typically have a one size fits all. Here we're really dealing with projects that have a variety of approaches, feedstocks and technologies. So if we get into this alternative, if we jump to the next slide, please. So the way the commodity approach, so this is what the certification schemes do, the way they approach this boundary allocation questions, typically there is a definition. You can see at the far left there, there'll be a definition of wastes that are coming in that are treated free of burden. And so your bioenergy system starts in processing a material. If it's a waste product, if it's a dedicated product, it starts with the production of that material. And then any non-energy products are essentially allocated out of the system by looking at the energy share of each of the outputs, which if it's a non-energy product, that energy share can be of course, everything has some level of energy associated with it, but that energy share can be, can vary. So what you get from that commodity approach is that focus on the actual production of the bioenergy system, allocation out of any non-energy products so you don't take any further comparison of them. But you do have the advantage that everything's now being assessed against that fossil fuel equivalent bioenergy product. And so if that's kerosene for sustainable aviation fuel or diesel or natural gas, you've got a clear fuel to fuel and always the same. So if we can go to the next one, the project approach. In the project approach, the bioenergy production process, everything included in the bioenergy project is we essentially what's called expand the boundary of the system boundary to include all of the energy and non-energy products and services associated with the bioenergy system. So if this was canola being used to make sustainable aviation fuel, you would have non-energy products such as high protein animal feed. You might have propane and other products coming out at the SAF stage. You may be, if you were utilizing manure to produce biogas, you may be providing a waste treatment service. So we include all of those things within the bioenergy system. What we then have to do is expand the reference scenario to not just include the fossil energy reference, but includes the fossil energy reference and the current way in which we produce each of those products. So we need a reference system for the protein meal, a reference system for the other fuels coming out, and a reference system for how the waste is currently treated. So all products and services are included. The reference system includes both. What you can imagine now is that the answers we get in absolute terms are now not per just for a megajoule of fuel, it is for a range of products and services. So here, the sort of benchmarking value becomes less comparable between projects because the number now is going to be different. But the percentage change actually remains a valid thing where we can look at the impacts. And I'll show an example of that shortly. One big change that we've had, what we typically did in the 2016 guidance, is we did this system expansion, but we would typically, and this is often done in LCA, we would move those non-energy products and subtract them from the bioenergy system. So if we go to the next slide, which shows what we don't do anymore, Now, this is mathematically correct. If you provide a credit to the bioenergy system for providing protein meal, you provide a credit for providing waste treatment services, but it can look a little bit like the tail wagging the dog, because you can have a large amount of negative credits applied to the bioenergy system, such that the actual bioenergy project itself can actually have a negative footprint before you even start to combust it. And again, it's not mathematically wrong. It just can, in percentage terms, it will look a little bit strange. And so we've decided that it's more representative of the net benefit in a percentage terms to leave the reference scenario to be inclusive of all the products, and the bioenergy scenario inclusive of all of the products. And this is very much compliant with the international standards in life cycle assessment. So if we go to the next slide, I've got an example of how this might look like. So let's imagine we've got this mythical project where we're converting some organic waste to produce lipids, and some fertilizer byproducts. We're going to then refine that into a sustainable aviation fuel using a HEFA process, which will produce naphtha as a byproduct. So when we set the project up, the project produces 1 megajoule of the functional unit of the project produces 1 megajoule of fuel, maybe 12 grams of high protein animal feed, 5 grams of protein, and 2.1 grams of naphtha. That's all per megajoule of fuel. So everything's scaled. Still to producing a megajoule of net fuel, but there are these small fractions of other products. We then define how the bioenergy system delivers that. And of course, it delivers them within its boundary. It doesn't have to go outside of its boundary to be able to produce them, because the actual reference flow is defined by what the bioenergy system produces. But for the reference scenario, we need to go and work out, okay, how do you meet 12 grams of canola meal? Well, you can meet that with 10 grams of soybean meal, which has a higher protein content. So you're looking for the equivalent functionality in the marketplace. And so the reference system will have some soybean meal. It maybe has some refinery-based propane and maybe some refinery-based naphtha as those co-energy products. If we go to the next slide, we'll just see how this plays out, what this looks like. So on the left, we have the project approach. So all of the impacts in the reference scenario, we have the aviation fuel production from kerosene. We have a large amount of emissions from organic waste management. So that's emissions from landfill. We have some emissions from producing fertilizer in the conventional sense, and some emissions from producing the hydrocarbons. The bioenergy project has 1 footprint that produces all of those things. And so that's essentially how that comparison happens. What happens to get to the commodity approach, you can see if we break the green bar into using energy allocation into its 3 or 4 components. So we apply the energy mix to how much of the footprint of it is allocated to the SAF, to the fertilizer product, and to the hydrocarbons. Those 2 grey bars really become the commodity approach. So this really shows how the commodity approach is really a subset of the overall bioenergy system project approach, with the other products allocated out and no backtracking of the counterfactual way in which the waste is treated in this particular case. The percentage improvement, we're still looking at 2 whole systems, so it really does give you a good sense of the percentage improvement on both sides of that equation. If we go to the next slide. So the commodity approach always needs to be calculated in the LCA. And so that's so that we've always got that general benchmark, and keeping the guidance aligned with those international schemes. The project approach is available to be used to better describe the benefits of more complex projects. So we felt that sometimes the commodity approach will undervalue the non-energy products, and therefore looking at the range of projects, we may be missing some of the larger benefits that are accrued with those more complex projects. And so that's why that's been included, and we think that's a really valuable way to really deal with that the dilemma of oversimplification in one sense that misses the complex benefits of those larger projects. So I hope you've got that that's sort of clear, and it is a complex topic. If we maybe go to the next slide. Oh, that's it.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Janice. That was really great. I am going to now pass it over to Lisa Randone, our Portfolio Insights Manager at Arena. She will talk us through the Q&A session, moderate it. Feel free to continue using the Q&A function or raise your hand if you have any questions. But over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Samira. And yes, definitely use the Q&A function, but also if you're keen to speak up and voice your question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute yourself. So I can see there is already one hand up. I just might ask one question before we go into the kind of floor questions. So I'm just thinking about the benefits of undertaking an LCA. We heard about Arena's view, obviously, but from a project perspective, let's say I have a bioenergy project on hand. Why would I need to do an LCA, and when? What are the benefits of doing that from a project perspective? Any thoughts on that?
I can speak to that, Lisa. I think so we've been involved with a large number of LCAs for bioenergy over the last since the guidelines were published 9 years ago. And I think what we found and what the benefits are of doing lifecycle assessment, to start with, it kind of validates that emission reduction claim. So it's using international best practice to compare to the conventional fuels and validate whether there are reductions and what that carbon balance is. There's also lots of insights to be derived from doing the study. So understanding what actually drives impact and emissions, and what are the hotspots across the life cycle, and what can you do, what are the opportunities to reduce, and how significantly can you drive down that through process efficiencies or alternative feedstocks, etc. As already mentioned, it's obviously used for investment decisions. Arena is a strong driver in this space in terms of where to allocate funds, but there are other investors out there that want to understand whether they're investing in a true carbon and environmental improvement project. And we tend to focus a lot on the carbon emissions, but the LCA delivers a range of different relevant environmental impacts as well. So it's not just carbon focused, but it's looking holistically across broader environmental impacts and risks. And given the international standards and certifications as well, this really is opening up for market access as well to where those standards are in place, and it kind of opens up the playing field, and you can compete on the international scale and in different jurisdictions. So there are multiple benefits from LCA, and of the ones I mentioned, I would say most of them are relevant to all projects that we've been involved with.
Thanks, Jonas. So I guess the meaning is consider doing LCA even if you're not an Arena-funded project, I guess. So I could see some hands were coming up and then now they're disappeared, but maybe we'll start with one question that we got in the Q&A session, and everyone feel free to warm up with your hands. So we got a question from a person who wants to know whether having municipal solid waste that are original designated obviously to landfill, if this waste is used as feedstock, and then the bioenergy project is providing a service, would that gain a CO2 credit?
Yeah, I can maybe take that. So under the commodity approach, typically that you get that municipal solid waste for free, but you don't get at least at this point, you don't get a credit for taking that waste and removing that pathway. Under the project approach, that's exactly what it's there for, is to say, okay, if the counterfactual is that the material would be going to landfill, then the reference system would have landfill emissions associated with it. The bioenergy system would not have those landfill emissions because it's actually utilising the waste. And so essentially you do compare the material going to landfill under the reference definition and not going to landfill under the bioenergy scenario. So it essentially is part of the calculation of the overall benefits. Of course, the tricky part is ensuring that that counterfactual is a real counterfactual, is that the material would have gone to landfill, and that so that's the sort of the devil's in the detail there.
Thanks, Tim. Oh, we got a hands up, so I'm going to go with a hands up first, and then we go to the Q&A. So let me unmute you, Dustin, so you can ask your question. Okay. Would you like to try to turn your mic on and see what that works?
Kia ora, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I just had a question around the avoided impacts piece, and the counterfactual, which you just mentioned. Is there any standards outlined as best practice to assess that? Like, are you sort of referring off to WBCSD guidance on best practice to assess counterfactual? Because I know that can get into a bit of a murky world, and we need to be really clear on the counterfactual and making sure that it's robust and realistic.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific guidance on designing the counterfactual. I suppose the things that you would take into account in doing that would be the time frame. So there is today's counterfactual, and there may be a future counterfactual. And obviously, when we offset electricity with a system, that electricity being offset would change over time. But typically, one of the complexities is deciding what those reference scenarios are, and how to deal with them over time. And we've relatively were uncomfortable modelling a potential future over time to actually then apply that as a time-based changing counterfactual. So in LCA terms, what we typically do, and I think this would be done in bioenergy projects, is that you would decide on a baseline which is a little bit conservative and says, okay, at the moment, this is what happens, and that becomes the counterfactual. You've got evidence that, yes, that material does go to landfill or is treated in this way. And then you would use sensitivity analysis to address what is the risk to the emission benefits, or the potentials of the emission benefits, as that counterfactual maybe changes between different alternatives. Maybe it gets diverted from landfill into garden organics. Okay, well, what if we're taking that as a feedstock? Does that change? Right. And so that's really the way we address those uncertainties, rather than having a formula determination that gives you one answer. We want to add richness to the understanding of how the project might evolve over time.
Through scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the way I would tackle it, but I don't know any specific documentation, and if there is some, I'd be really interested to.
I'll definitely link the WBCSD guidance, but yeah, I'm curious around the other LCA impacts. Are you also, because you mentioned net emissions, so there's the avoided emissions pieces. Are you also looking at avoided impacts of the other LCA impacts, like eutrophication, for example?
Yeah, so once the LCA modelling applies to climate change and applies the same to the other indicators, which are particulate matter, eutrophication, fossil energy depletion, and there's one, land use and water use. So they would apply equally to those others.
And why did like ecotoxicity, for example, come? How were the impact categories chosen, I suppose, is my last question.
They're chosen based on their potential relevance to the bioenergy system. So obviously water and land are important. Particulate matter is associated a lot with combustion of bioenergy and combustion with non-bioenergy systems, and kills 8 million people per year prematurely. Eutrophication is obviously related to nitrogen cycles, which are very connected to bioenergy. So each one of them has a really strong connection into the bioenergy system, but we wanted to avoid taking the 16 impact categories that the European Union use and ending up with overburdening the interpretation, because if you have that many categories, being able to interpret them becomes really difficult, and the uncertainties around the ecotox work are generally really high. You need 2 to 3 orders of magnitude difference before those modelers will say that you can make any conclusions from them, and you rarely have that level of difference. So we feel that, look, it doesn't add a huge amount to the results given the uncertainty that some of those other indicators bring in. These are the required indicators, and if your project addressed a significant toxicity issue, no one stops you adding toxicity to an LCA to demonstrate what that benefits are. But in terms of looking at the risks of ecotox, up and down the supply chain, that's almost like a risk assessment you would want to do yourself outside of the LCA.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin, for your questions. We might move to a question that received even 2 thumbs up, and I encourage everyone to like the questions and to vote for the questions so I can prioritize for you. So this question is really about novel feedstock and how do we approach it. So how would be the approach for a novel feedstock with expected decades-long production and sequestration, such as oilseed trees? Would you average the sequestration over the expected lifetime oilseed volume, and accept there will be a likely variation there? If you're confused, you can read the question in the Q&A, or whoever asked the question, Catherine, you are welcome to come off mute and further explain if you like.
Yeah. I think I can at least start to address it. So within any life cycle assessment, you have that long-term view, and so if there is a upfront investment in trees, and look, we do this for when we look at avocados and nuts and all sorts of different products that have and forestry, and so you look over a full cycle of the system. And yes, you would amortize both the impacts and any benefits associated with the production stage, the developmental stage of those plants. And typically we amortize those across the entire project, generally without any discounting that you would do in economic amortization. So we look at the big picture system view, and so you would evaluate that across the entire project.
Thanks, team. And Catherine, I allow you to come off mute if you want to add anything or ask clarifications. If not, I might move on.
All good.
Okay, fantastic. We might move on to the next one, and this is about the project approach. So is the project approach primarily used for co-located or vertically integrated bioenergy projects, or can it also be used for a more complex supply chain? I
would say both. It can be used for even a simple supply chain, a simpler fuel project. It may give a very similar answer and not really add very much to the commodity approach if it's not complicated. But yes, it is very much about when you're integrating your bioenergy system, targeting a range of different end markets. That's where it really becomes much more comprehensive than the commodity approach, which simply uses an energy allocation to get rid of anything that isn't the fuel of for the certification scheme. So I would say for both of those circumstances, the project approach adds value to the overall LCA.
Fantastic, thank you. Then we got another question with thumbs up. Love it. So this one is, which form of calculation best accommodates the production of useful high-value carbon byproducts, for example, biochar, when lignocellulosic feedstocks are used to produce bioenergy?
Again, I think both. So lignocellulosic energy through to, say, pyrolysis, gasification, and production of biochar, the energy allocation won't be the worst system in that. There's not a huge waste treatment sort of benefit if you're using, high quality lignocellulosic materials that maybe typically have, close to zero value. So it's not so much a waste treatment service. You've then got a range of energy-based products and a carbon product, which is very closely related to the energy in the biochar. So the commodity approach won't be the worst approach for undertaking that. Again, the project approach may add some, if there are some non-energy related benefits, and particularly, the biochar, its use as a carbon store, and in its agronomic uses and things may be more than just the energy value of that product. So there would be value from the project approach to look, and particularly outside of the carbon indicators, those values of utilization of the biochar could be really valuable to look at the improvements in agriculture and things other than just the sheer store of carbon. So I'm a big fan of the project approach. It was the sort of something we brought forward in the guidance. So yeah, pretty much the answer to everything is going to be, hey, the project approach is a really helpful additional insight to the baseline calculation using the commodity approach.
Thanks, Tim. And I quickly saw hands coming up, maybe from Jennifer. I allow you to come off mute if you like. Otherwise, we might move on to the next question. Okay, maybe your question was already answered. So we got another question from Simon, and because this is the second one, I will ask you again, would you like to come off mute? I allow you to do so if you like, otherwise I'm going to read your question. Everyone seems to be very shy today. So I'm going to read out Simon's question. So if feedstock, for example, canola, historically designated for fuel production in another country, is diverted to local production, does it mean on additional grounds are carbon credits occurred?
So I think I get what it's saying, what it's asking. So we have, when you've got a production system that is you're deliberately cultivating and producing a crop going into a bioenergy system, and we currently do this. We produce canola. We send a significant amount of it internationally into the biodiesel market. If we were to divert that back to Australian production, the LCA looks the same. You've still got you're still growing each crop, and the production impacts of each crop are allocated to the production system that they go into. And so currently 80% or some amount of the Australian canola production is allocated into the European biofuel. If you were to remove it and bring it back here, we still would be allocating the emissions. It's not that canola is freer or is any different. It would still be modelled as a deliberate canola production, go, level of field, plant, harvest, and the like. What it I think maybe what it's trying to get at, though, is at the moment, say in the Corsia scheme, if you're using canola, you get typically add a indirect land use value associated with that, on the assumption that additional canola will lead to land use change and expansion of land demand, which has potential to have risks for indirect land use change globally. And if we were to bring all of our canola, say, back from Europe and process it here in Australia, technically there may not be the same level of land use change because we're really moving an existing commodity from one production system into another. And the answer is that at the moment, none of that would be taken into account. Essentially, the land use change risk associated with the crops assigned under that would be dealt with in the same way. I suppose within the guidance for ARENA that we've provided, we didn't get to, there is a section on land use change where proponents are asked to describe what the land use change risks are associated with the bioenergy project. So there's no specific calculations, but just pointing out what are the potential risks for land use change. And in that, if the description of the project was to utilise canola that is no longer going to European markets in an Australian context, that would, I suppose, add some weight to the idea that maybe the land use change risk is not as significant as it would be if we said we're going to treble the canola production and send it half to Europe and use it. So it would be, I suppose, it'd be a contextual piece of information at that point. But in terms of the calculation, I don't think it changes anything in the main LCA calculations, either using the commodity or the project approach.
Thanks, Tim. Let me check if we got any new question. Probably just a comment from Simon just saying the question was based on additionality. Okay. I think maybe while we wait for more questions coming in, I might also ask another question. So it seems that LCA is quite a complex assessment to do. Just focusing on the complexities, when a project or anyone is completing an LCA, what are the hardest elements to tackle and work through in your experience as LCA practitioners? And do you think, what kind of skill sets, what kind of tools do we need to complete an LCA? And is it something that can be done independently by a project, or does it need, kind of a specific consultant? And obviously this is when probably LCA practitioners come in. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the most difficult parts, and even in writing the guidance, coming up with the example systems and functional units and reference systems, that's particularly in this context, one of the most difficult parts is to frame up particularly the reference system. If you're making something that's quite novel coming out of your bioenergy system, a complex animal feed supplement, it may be that there is no equivalent supplement in the industry at the moment, and so you can't point to one product that potentially replaces that. And so you may need to point to a behavior practice or 2 or 3 mixes of products that are used to address the market that your unique bioenergy product is producing, or your bioenergy system is producing. So setting up those functional units and the reference scenarios, and even in the commodity approach, working out the energy content for allocation of non-energy products. Non-energy products typically don't have a stated energy content, but you need one to actually be able to do the allocation. So again, you're looking at a unique sort of side stream that suddenly you've got to try and work out what is its energy, its lower heating value when combusted energy, which is not easy. That's sort of from the sort of technical point of view. Maybe in terms of the tools that are available, I think for the greenhouse gas assessment, you We're used to working with emission factors and building up a calculation of the carbon emissions associated with facilities and activities and products. I think once you step to the more complete LCA where you're tracking 6 or 7 indicators, it becomes unmanageable in some ways to work with trying to find a eutrophication emission factor, a water scarcity emission factor, and so there the LCA typically moves into LCA software domains. And so of course, as a LCA software seller and consultant, of course, I'm going to say, well, you probably need some help from experienced LCA people for that second stage of the LCA. Although it's really the people who know. One of the hardest things about any LCA is understanding the system you're working in, and if you're proposing a bioenergy project, you are probably the person who understands that system best. So there's normally that collaboration between someone who knows how the LCA part works and then key people who understand how the bioenergy system works. Jonas, not sure if you had anything to add.
I agree. I think in my experience, I've seen it done 2 ways in terms of navigating the process efficiently and kind of getting past the complexities. So some organizations, they simply use the specialists to understand the guidelines, the methodology, kind of how it's typically done, and have access to the software tools and the databases and do all the modeling. But for some organizations where they have strong in-house capability and some understanding of LCA, the work can be shared. So those specific critical points that Tim pointed out in terms of producing not just the carbon emission factors or emissions, but the full environmental impacts, is really useful to work with a consultant or an expert that have access to those databases and can navigate and find the most appropriate data to use in the modeling as well. So it adds kind of confidence and efficiency to work at least with a consultant experienced in the area.
Thank you. We might move to actual examples and case studies. It might be a tricky one. Someone is asking, are you able to provide any case studies or examples? I believe the meaning is, or example of the new guidelines being applied to projects, but Catherine, if you mean something else, feel free to jump off mute. In that regards, from ARENA perspective, given that we have released the guidelines really recently, we didn't receive any LCA undertaken using the new guidelines yet, but we'll definitely see some of them coming in shortly, because all the ARENA funded bioenergy project will need to follow the guidelines and do the LCA according to the guidelines. So nothing as far as I'm aware from ARENA land. I'm not sure if Tim or Jonas have seen anything from your side.
In the appendix, there are not so much results, but we have maybe 5 or 6 different setups of how the functional units, the definition of the reference flows and definition of the comparative reference system would be set up for, I think it's 5 or 6 different styles of project. And that's sort of that conceptualizing piece of how to give people an idea of how to set up, where does the waste treatment service go? How do you deal with when your co-products on both sides of your reference product isn't exactly the same quality as the bioenergy output? So they give you that sense of how you do that scaling and things. But we haven't, typically there are quite a few examples using system expand, that sort of project approach, but generally there's been undertaken with substitution, and so we don't have any specific full completed examples as yet with the new guidance.
Watch out the space. Thanks, Tim. So we've got a question about land use. So can you clarify whether the guidelines include an emission factor for land use change, and maybe if we want to flag if there is any difference compared to the previous guidelines in terms of this aspect?
This is always a tricky one. So any direct land use change associated with the project would be included, and that's not a change from the previous guidance. If your project requires removal of vegetation or a active change of land use, and so that isn't changed, and that's just using the standard approaches, which are relatively well known. The elephant in the room is often the indirect land use change, which some certification schemes have tried to address in different ways. And when we looked at it, there's not really a consistent, easy way to address the potential indirect land use change risks that we felt confident to recommend as a default number. So we've gone with a qualitative approach of having to describe potential risks associated with indirect land use change. And so for those who maybe are not aware, direct land use change is where your project physically is maybe changing some land from being, maybe it was grazing land and now it's going to be a bioenergy crop, or maybe in the reverse, you've got your taking some forest land and converting it into cropping land, which is probably unlikely in a bioenergy project these days. So that would be the direct. The indirect really is that effect on the international market. If you are going to demand, utilize, say, an oil seed, and you plan to utilize, there's a inference that if you're using something that is already used, that it could put pressure on the global markets for that commodity, and that expresses itself somewhere in the world with land use change associated because something that was previously used in margarine is now being used in a biofuel. So and that's a really tricky one. Some of the certification schemes have used some very complex modelling and they come up with a number. Others, I think the EU RED basically has a similar qualitative approach, but they are a little bit different. Everyone's struggling with what that piece looks like.
Thanks, Tim. And I think that we've got just 1 or 2 minutes left. So I maybe put a call out there. If anyone is brave enough to put their hand up and ask a question, that would be a good close out before we hand it over to Samira. Otherwise, I might read some more questions. It seems that both the questions we got in the chat are quite complex. So if either Lydia or Note are keen to jump off mute, that would be easier to address, I guess.
Yeah, hi there. Hi, Tim. I was just wondering, do the ARENA guidelines specify whether our energy allocation should be on a higher or lower heating basis?
Lower heating basis, I believe. And did we specify that in the guidance? We should have. I think we did. And I think we took the lead off of Corsair and a few other, maybe the Renewable Energy Directive used lower heating values.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. And given that was a quick one, very last chance for Renaud to come off mute if you like. And apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly.
No, that's okay. No, so as I wrote here, so one of the scenarios that we're looking at is strip plantings for woody biomass. So, for example, oil mallees that are planted strip plantings around food crop paddies. So they have secondary benefits like salinity control and erosion control, etc. Can those secondary benefits be included in the project methodology?
Technically, under the project approach, yes, you could. It's a matter of whether you can quantifyingly, when you've got some benefits to reducing erosion, the that will express itself, and it's maybe very difficult to quantify, the net amount of that over a given amount of time. It could be that in the reference scenario that there are other activities that would otherwise need to be undertaken to prevent that erosion. So, there's other erosion control, maybe putting rock banks or covering things with whatever, or having to plant it in something else. So there may be a demonstrable counterfactual that needs to be undertaken to maintain that same level of soil stability, and your bioenergy solution, actually provides that service and provides bioenergy. So that'd be one way to tackle it. We do have the land use indicator does include sort of the general benefits of land, of soil organic carbon. I think it's still the soil organic carbon deficit model. It has some sort of generic ecosystem service value depending on what the occupation flows are, but it's not really going to capture those sort of local benefits of a specific activity. So I would think to maybe try and look at that counterfactual. And again, if it's a little bit of seems a bit of a stretch, then maybe they wouldn't actually undertake those additional activities. It might be something you actually run as a sensitivity to say, well, here's our model, here's our answer. To achieve that same level of soil stability, here's what the additional things you would need to do, and just to, really to demonstrate that quantitatively. Otherwise, you can also demonstrate it qualitatively just by saying, this project also stabilizes, 400 hectares of road reserve, reduces pollution, and so you can, and not necessarily force it to be quantitatively assessed within the LCA.
Thank you, team, and thank you, Jonas, and especially thank you to all, to everyone who joined for the questions. So I'll pass it over to Samira to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Maybe if we can just go to the last slide of the day. Thanks for joining, everyone. We hope you found the session quite useful. Before you drop off today, we'd be grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to give us some feedback. It'll help us understand the type of events and information that you find useful. You'll just need to follow the QR code, and it shouldn't take you too long to fill up the survey. We'll also paste the link in the chat if that's easier for you to access. Note that a recording of this webinar will be published on our website, so the Knowledge Bank, in the coming weeks, so you can share this event with anyone else who may have missed out today. But that's all from us. Thanks for dialing in, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.